So last night, as I was doing the washing up, I went into daydream mode as you do, and I started thinking about object-oriented programming, object-oriented design, architecture, good practices, a single responsibility, the solid principles, all of that kind of stuff. And I came up with an analogy around car manufacture, and I thought today I would just talk about it this morning. I don't think it's a far-fetched thing to talk about programming in cars, especially in 2018 when you've got all sorts of new cars out there with lots and lots of code. And I don't know if this is true, of course, but I would certainly imagine that a new car today has far more code in there than perhaps the average website. You know, that to me just seems like such a plausible thing. Anyway, let's get back to the story. So you've been tasked to help build code around a car. In fact, specifically, you've been asked to do the gearbox, okay? At the time, you haven't really been given enough requirements about what the gearbox needs, right? How to define what the gearbox is. This happens all the time when you're given a task and you start asking questions and they're like, oh, we're not too sure yet, whatever. So let's say, for example, you don't know that it's a manual or an automatic, nor do you know how many gears are required. You just know that you need to create a Gearbox class to handle these kind of things. So you go away and you create your Gearbox class, and you're very happy with it, and you think of all the possible scenarios and everything. It's all good. You then later on get a call, perhaps closer to the deadline than you would perhaps like, giving you a little bit more information about what this Gearbox class requires. And in fact, it's a manual gearbox. It requires a reverse gear, and that's like gear 5 or something. And you're okay, fine, I can fit all that in. I've kind of thought about these kind of things, so that's good. So you start plugging that in, and it works, and you're happy with it. However, because of the timeline, because of the deadline looming, you haven't been able to have a lot of time to refactor the code, to actually really narrow down the definition of the code. Your class is literally just called Gearbox. So looking at that class, you wouldn't be able to tell whether it's an automatic or whether it is a manual gearbox, or how many gears there are and how to get into reverse and all of that kind of stuff. But you know that it works because you ran some tests and all of that kind of stuff, and it goes live. And there you go. They start selling these cars. There's thousands on the road. Everybody's happy, making lots of money. It's all good. It's all good. The boss man, the big cheese, gets this radical idea that, in fact, what they want to do now is start making automatic cars. And he thinks, or she thinks, that what they can do is just clone the car that they've got, and they can just take, all the code that was written for this manual car and just plonk it on this automatic car, and everything's happy and fun. And yes, you'll have to do some tweaks here and there, but the code is pretty much already written. At this point, you should be freaking out. You should be like, oh no, because the definition of this car is totally different, because for one, it's an automatic, and therefore the gearbox needs to be has to be altered, right? And perhaps you do mention these things, and perhaps they fall on deaf ears, or maybe you don't even mention these things. I'm going to talk about some different types of ways you can get around this situation. For instance, the first way, and I'll talk about the bad ways first. The first way is perhaps you don't even mention a thing, right? And you just know that you have a lot of work to do in a very short period of time, and that time has been squished because the owner thinks that all the code is reusable. And so what you do is you just take your Gearbox class and you push a lot of code into that. You squeeze, you compact, that handles automatic gearboxes. And you kind of thread that through and wind that into the current code in that single class. And because you've gone and done that, you can't call that gearbox class a manual gearbox class, nor can you call it an automatic gearbox class, because it is in fact a God class, because anything that class doesn't know about gearboxes is not worth knowing, because that class just handles any type of gearbox class. Now that you might think is probably the quickest way of doing it, because you're reusing the code that you've already written in the previous car, right? That's a good thing. Dry, don't repeat yourself. You've literally just taken that existing code, you've altered it, and you've allowed the automatic stuff in. You've ran the tests that you created previously for the manual. They still work, so you're happy with that. It's all good. And that gets released. So now you've got manual cars out, you've got automatic cars out, and everybody's a winner, right? And the owner is feeling amazing because he's just getting, or she's getting lots and lots of money, because now they've got a whole new branch of cars that are available. Then they get a phone call and something is wrong with the reverse gear on the manual, right? And this could even require a recall. Now, what are you going to recall? Are you going to recall the automatic cars, or are you going to recall the manual cars? The boss woman wants to recall just the manual cars, you know, narrow down the risk. However, you've gone and shared that risk with the manual cars, because it's this God class, because this class, this one class that has all of these responsibilities, has a bug in the reverse. And you can't be 100% sure whether it will just affect manual or automatic, because it's so entwined, because the code is just such a mess. Yes, the tests run, but really? So that's like the worst case, end of the world sort of scenario, and you have to, maybe they don't get recalled, but you need to patch not only the automatics but the manuals as well. It just gets a bit of a headache. So that is a scenario where you think you're doing the right thing because it's going to make you a quicker developer and all of that stuff, but in fact what you're doing is you're messing up the responsibility. You're creating this massive God class that has ownership of both of these two types of cars. Scenario 2, of course, is where you actually create a separate class specifically for automatics and specifically for manual. However, you don't actually reuse any code, or you do reuse code, but in the sense of you copy and paste code from one to the other. And you do that because they're on separate code repositories, perhaps, right? The problem there is that if you've got a bug in one gearbox, you've probably got a bug in the other gearbox, especially when you're talking about the generic types of gearboxes and stuff, in the generic parts of that code, because you're not actually sharing the code. You can't just fix the code in one place, you have to fix the code in two. And that's problematic. To get around that, of course, what you do is you branch that off and you have a separate automatic class, manual class. They extend down to sort of an abstract gearbox class. And you put all of the code that is used by both types of gearboxes in this class. And therefore, if there's any bugs in that, you only have to fix one place. Now, you could take this a whole lot further. And you could actually say, well, the gearbox itself is a container of gears. The box itself shouldn't actually have any knowledge of the gear. The gear, whether it's the first gear or the second gear or the reverse gear. It is just a collection of gears. The gear itself should have the knowledge of whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever. The gear itself should know whether it's an automatic gear or whatever. And therefore you can start abstracting that even further, and you can say, well, actually I'm going to create gear classes, small little gear classes that just do reverse, just do first gear, second gear, that kind of thing. The gearbox class, like I said, is just this container of gears. So when you instantiate the gearbox class, whether it's automatic or whether it's manual, you inject the gears in, right? And then it just works off of those. So the gearbox class has, say, move up, move down, that kind of thing. It's literally just changing the gear object, the gear class, from one to the other, right? Another really useful thing when you're working on small classes, classes that have a single responsibility, it means that you can easily test those classes. It means that you can change those classes, and the interference that that class has on other classes is minimal. Imagine, if you will, you were still using this ginormous God class of thousands and thousands of lines of code that handle all situations of gearboxes and all of that stuff, and you had to test something, or you had to refactor something. Oh, that would just be painful, just be absolutely painful. The amount of tests being thrown at that one class is going to be huge, whereas the amount of tests thrown at a single gear class, well, that yes, there is going to be loads, but it's going to be specific to a gear. It's not going to be specific to the gearbox, right? It's not going to be specific to the reverse gear, right? Because that's a separate thing. That is a separate thing. It has its own separate responsibility. And so you can test for a whole manner of abstract things, a whole manner of things to do with that single responsibility. You can come up with these wild test cases and stuff just in case things break. You can't do that very well when you've got this God class, when you've got this class that basically has ownership of everything. You just can't do that. So that's kind of where my head was yesterday when I was cleaning the dishes, having a gearbox and thinking about that in terms of object orientation. Basically, the point is to break down things as much as you can, to define things as much as you can, and name things as well, right? So you know exactly what it is by just reading it. It's not gearbox. It is automatic gearbox. It is reverse gear. It is first gear. You know exactly what it is. You know, therefore, what exactly it isn't as well. Now, if you're wondering why I'm down here rather than upstairs in the office, it's because tomorrow I'm actually traveling. I'm actually going to New York, first time in America, which is dead exciting. I can't wait. And I'm testing out the equipment. I'm testing out the GoPro, I'm testing out the lavalier microphone and other bits and pieces as well, which I'm going to be taking with me. Now, if you found this video useful, then let me know. Put your comments down in the comments section below. I do have a Discord server, so if you've got any coding queries that you want to talk about to not just me, but to other people as well, do join the Discord server. It's also going to support the channel in its further future growth. Thanks ever so much for watching, guys. Happy coding, and I will see you again next time. Cheers, bye.